to be recording this event, and we'll follow up afterwards with a blog post and video recap. I also wanted to share that we have live captioning. So if you head up to the top of your screen and you see live streaming with Otter, you can click on that and have access to live automated captions. They are automated, so imperfect, but hopefully can help you follow along. I dropped those in the chat as well. I'd love to hear, it's great to see where folks are joining from. Can you add in the chat if you've been to a Speaker Stories event before, or if this is your first time joining us? First time, awesome. Great. A few first timers, fantastic. This is still a pretty new event series for us, and really excited to have you all here. We started this event series to really be able to highlight our speakers. Women Talk Design, we have a directory of speakers of over 600 women and non-binary folks from around the world. And they each have such unique paths to speaking and topics that they're speaking on and advice to share. And so this series really allows us to hear from them about what is it that they're speaking about, how did they get started, and what advice they can share. So the way that this is going to work, I have some pre-prepared questions to get started with that I'll ask Kat, and then we're going to save a lot of time for it to hear from you. And so I recommend as we go, you're welcome to drop questions in the chat, and I'm going to save them till about 20 minutes in. I'll invite you if you can to unmute yourself and ask the question to Kat yourself, but it's really helpful to have it in the chat first. So start thinking about what is it that I have to ask Kat, what do I want to hear from her? I promise you have a lot that you can learn from Kat. And then the last 15 minutes, we're going to save time to connect with one another. And so we'll be doing breakout rooms. Kat is an expert on connection. And so she actually has some prompts to help us connect with one another and meet each other. And then we'll come back and sign off. And so that is our lineup for today. And without further ado, I'm super excited to introduce you to Kat. So Kat Vellos is a user experience designer with a passion for helping people connect authentically. And as a user experience designer, she worked at Slack and Pandora, and as well as with the creators of Siri, designing the first iteration of Bixby. Kat has been profiled in Forbes and quoted in Fast Company for her works with Bay Area Black designers, which she's the founder of. It's a professional development community for Black designers and UX researchers. She's researched, designed, and advised on the user experience of countless flows in digital products serving millions of people. And lastly, she's turned her UX experience towards combating the loneliness epidemic. So she debuted her book, We Should Get Together, which you should all check out. It's helping people around the world experience greater health and well-being through cultivating fulfilling friendships. And she's also spoken at events like UX Week, AIGA San Francisco, Design for America, Lesbians Who Tech, SF Design Week, Bay Area Black Designers, and Social Good Tech Week. And so thrilled to have her here today to share a bit about her story. So please help me welcome Kat.
Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Thank you so much for being here this morning. And thank you, Danielle, for having me on. This is really exciting. I love the work that you do, and it's really wonderful anytime I get to connect with your community. And I'm excited today to share more about my journey as a designer, as a speaker, as well as a designer, author, all the things that relate. So I am going to just start at the beginning. So my journey as a speaker has kind of had some dips in the road. So there's been some ups and downs, because it hasn't always looked like what it is today. Frequently, I think when we see people whether it's online, on Twitter, in the media, whatever, we only see the after, we only see the immediate moment. And we don't know all the stuff that it took to get them to that spot. So I didn't just pop out of the room where I am today, doing conferences and speaking and doing workshops and all these different kinds of things. It was kind of a journey. So a little bit about my background. So I got my degree in graphic design, and I was a cover designer and editorial art director, my first job out of college, working for a local weekly magazine in North Florida. And in that time, I also was writing a lot of poetry, actually. I've been a poet for a long time. And so my very first speaking experience, as well as community organizing experience, was around a literary community that I started and ran for 4 years. It was called Poet Speak, and it was a spoken word and poetry community And so I was speaking in front of people bi-weekly for 4 years, sharing my creative work in that way. And I was doing that at arts events and at events for the city and at like anti-war events and all kinds of things. And so it just came out of a place of, in literary community, usually there's some sharing involved. You write something, either you print it or you maybe do a reading. And so that was my first experience with being really publicly visible for that. I remember one day, shortly before I left Florida, I was like walking down the street and a car drove by and a guy yelled out the window and I was like, thought I was going to get heckled, but he yelled, "Poet Speak." And I was like, that's the name of my event. And I was like, oh my God, like, what? What just happened? And it was like a kind of visibility for something that I cared about and that was important to me that I hadn't really ever experienced before. But I left Florida because I wanted to get more involved in honestly making this country a better place. So I joined AmeriCorps and I did a couple years of that. And I actually became a facilitator for multiple different kinds of like creative expression and community organizing projects and nonprofits and things like that. So I was speaking by leading groups in lots and lots of different ways. So at the time, I don't think I would have called it speaking. I was just facilitating, whether it was like at a conference for pioneers, like doing community building workshop for them so that the 500 members could get to know each other, or whether it was like walking into a middle school gymnasium and doing like a team building workshop for 400 13-year-olds. But it was, and if you think working with adults is hard, anyways, you should work with middle schoolers. And so, yeah, so it was a lot of like speaking in the sense that I was mobilizing people and sharing certain concepts around creative expression and social change and how those things go together and lead to leadership, and doing that with lots of different ages and different groups. And at the time I also was getting kind of burnt out. I'm an introvert. And so doing that kind of work full time and being so public and being so visible and speaking so much and leading so much was kind of burning me out. So I actually took a break intentionally. And when I had moved to the Northwest to do that work, I actually didn't do any more poetry. I didn't want to be known for that. I didn't want my whole identity to just be this one thing. I wanted people to know me for me. So I actually like stopped doing poetry. And after a while, I like stopped lead facilitating a lot of big events like that, just to see what it would be like to give myself a break and to let people in the world engage with me in a different way. I took a sabbatical. I was not really active on social media. Social media was also kind of new because that wasn't around certainly when I was running my literary community. And when I moved to the Bay Area and decided to go back to doing design full time, particularly digital design, the world was really different. Like social media was a thing and like the internet was like way different. And working in tech was like super different. And so it was this time where at the beginning when I got here in 2014, I was kind of under the radar still, not super visible, really figuring things out, honestly trying to find my own community. And it was low visibility. And now in the last couple of years, particularly in the last year, I've gone back into a place of higher visibility because of choice, because of writing this book, because of putting it out there, and because of talking to the world about the Bay Area Black designers, which is a community I feel very passionate about and very committed to. And so it's been this mix of like design in the sense of like, I care about the health and success of Black people in the design world and in tech. And I also care a great deal about human connection. And that's why I wrote this book. And that's why I'm talking to people a lot about the value of belonging and connection. So that's kind of like what the journey looked like. And when Danielle and I first connected, which was probably about 3, maybe 4 years ago, she had reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to get involved in Women Talk Design? And I was in the dip at that time. I was in my low visibility time for so many reasons. So I felt honestly like a bit of constraints, and we had very open conversations about this. One of the constraints that I felt was that previously, all of the speaking and public events and leading and things that I had done, I was representing myself. These were things I created on my own, and I could just share them with the world. And something I noticed when I moved to the Bay Area is that for whatever reason, and I'm curious to hear what you all think about this in the chat maybe, is like, do you feel like you are representing your company anytime you go and speak publicly, whether that's at a conference or a gathering? Even on Twitter, people put in their profile, like, my tweets are my own, like, I work at this place, but my tweets are my own. And the sense that we have to really aggressively say, like, I speak for myself, to me conveyed something that was like, if you don't put it that way, people will think you're speaking on behalf of your company. And that was like a strange, like kind of needle scratch on the record for me. Like, why would you think that I represent a company at all times? I am a spokesperson for Cat Vellos. But it's true that in a lot of companies, they feel like if you speak publicly, like you have to run it through the PR team, you have to get approval from this person and that person. I've even had like companies say like, we want to see your notes before you share anything publicly. And it was like a level of honestly micromanaging that I just didn't want to deal with. I was busy running Bay Area Black designers. I was busy like living my life. I was like writing a book, and I just didn't want to have the additional burden of like, oh, now I have to get approval to use my own voice. So it was a little bit of that. And one of the other constraints that I felt was I did have a little bit of anxiety and fear around harassment, honestly. I had friends women who were designers, who had been trolled, who had been doxxed, who like jerks were mean to them online. And it was kind of very frightening to me. They had to go like completely offline, some of them. And that was frightening to me. And I didn't want either design Twitter to come out and like be mean to me, or have like a bunch of trolls like come out and be mean to me. And so there's this shadow side to visibility, which is that fear that that might happen. And even design Twitter, which is like, you know, designers can be pretty judgmental. Like you can't even redesign the most boring, non-controversial logo without people just like shouting it down and tearing it down. And I was like, yo, I'm not interested in that kind of engagement. And so those were some of the other constraints that I had, which was like that fear and that concern about like what would happen if I talked about the things that I cared about. So I was able to work through that. And I was able to free myself from those constraints and reclaim the voice that I already had in my early 20s, because I wanted to be seen, and I wanted to be seen for the things that I cared about, and I wanted to speak with my own voice. And the thing that was really the catalyst for a lot of that reclamation was writing my book. So I held it up before. So We Should Get Together is a book that I wrote. I worked on it between 2015 and 2019. It's the secret to cultivating better friendship. I put out an addendum this spring, which is connected from afar, because obviously we got to connect from afar. We're in a pandemic. But writing the first book was the catalyst for reclaiming that. And when I was putting this talk together for this morning, I realized I hadn't noticed this before, but it's really the written word that has been the foundation of my path as a speaker. That was true in the early 20s or early 200s when I was doing 2000s when I was doing my poetry community. And it's true now as a writer who shares a lot about human connection, adult friendship, isolation, loneliness, and the things that we need to heal our world and to heal our communities. So it's that journey as an author that really refocused the topic of visibility back into my life, because I wasn't going to create this thing that I was so passionate about and cared about so much, and then like just quietly like put it out in the world and like not tell anyone that it was there. Believe me, the thought crossed my mind. Because, you know, those same like goblins and demons were coming back of like, ooh, like somebody might be mean to you. Ooh, like design Twitter might think you're not a designer because you wrote a book that's not about design. For real, I had some designers be like, oh, so you're not a designer anymore? And I was like, why would you think that? Anyways, so publishing this book was about taking the mic, like tapping it and being like, hey, is this thing on? Because holding the mic wasn't new to me. I had always been that person, but it was really this combination of like corporate constraints and cultural constraints that had felt like I had this like muzzle on for the last few years. So releasing my book, quite honestly, and starting my own business this year were two of the most powerful and energizing things I've ever done in my life. And in terms of empowerment, in terms of full standing in my power, my ability, my visibility, and not being afraid. So speaking and writing is a big part of, like I said, who I was in my early 20s. And it's exactly what I'm doing now. So that dip in the middle, that valley that I had in my 30s was kind of honestly a break. And maybe it was necessary to take a rest, because you can't do this stuff like 100% every single day and night all the time. can get tiring. But I do feel like I'm fully back to being 100% of who I am. And the people who've known me for a long time know, like, oh yeah, like that's Kat. The people who maybe like know me now are like, oh, that's new. And I'm like, nah, honey, like that's not new. So I want to thank Danielle, especially for being really patient when I was in my cave for a couple of years. You know, I'm really, really happy to be living a lot more fully right now, to call my own shots, to speak on my own terms, and to be really visible about the things I care about, whether that's speaking out about obviously belonging, adult friendship, connection, or about the lack of diversity in tech and companies who claim to care about diversity but don't hire any Black designers. Or like whatever it may be, you know, whether it's police brutality or like climate change or whatever the things are that I care about, like now it feels available to me in a really full way. And it was honestly, I had to give myself that full permission to take that back on in that fearless way that I was when I was like fresh out of college and didn't give a shit. So here we go. That is the bulk of my talk. I know it's supposed to be 20 minutes. I am super excited to hear more about what resonated about that with you. Like, was there anything in that story? Go ahead and write in the chat if there was anything in that journey that felt resonant for you, or felt either like something that you've felt before, that you've worried about before, that you've been excited about before. I'd really love to know.
Yeah, and Kat, I want to share. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I can definitely resonate with a lot, and I know folks that are also in our community have felt that, like, it's great to be visible, but like I also need some time to myself. And I know that I'm personally a big fan of yours, and I'm really happy that you're back in your visibility fullness, because I think that the world really does need to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Danielle. I really appreciate that. Cool. So it looks like, yeah, so Sarah said, community is so important to establish, and it's hard being an introvert as a designer speaking out about certain topics. Absolutely. Melface, being more or less of a public person, it feels like there's only one direction. Can you say more about that, Mel? Do you mean like you either have to be completely visible or completely like under the radar, behind the scenes? Jamie says, definitely relate with feeling censored within a company and learning to use your personal voice in the workplace. Yep. Catherine, taking a break as an introvert. And another Catherine, I'm battling burnout and want to know how to work through it. True. Sabrina, being afraid of design Twitter on social media is real. I have some of the women in my designer to author mastermind circle. We talk about that. It's not, if you feel afraid of like design Twitter being me too, you are not alone. Other people feel that too. So Mel says, once you're on Twitter and tweeting, you can't go back to being a little more private. It might feel that way sometimes, but honestly, like, I think I went through that dip where I was like visible, then I was just like, I'm just gonna actually stop because I don't feel like I can. You know, I've had friends who had problems at work because of something they had tweeted, and I was like, that's BS. But it chilled me. Honestly, it chilled my free speech because I was worried of having the same challenges. Shayna says, I definitely resonated with being afraid of public because of backlash or unnecessarily harsh criticism. I tend to be really silent on social media because of it. And Natalie, the censoring by a company has definitely been a concern for me, but at the same time, speaking and writing outside of my company has been a catalyst for new opportunities, as well as my overall growth as a UX professional. Absolutely. I relate to literally every single thing that you all are writing in the chat right now. And I can say, so I want to speak to what Natalie mentioned, which is that speaking and writing, you know, being seen despite those concerns or finding a way to work around them, it really is a catalyst for new opportunities. Like, so once I said, you know, my book came out in January and I was like, here we go. And I started talking about it all the time. When you create something like a book, you have to tell people about it, and people who hear about it are going to ask you questions about it. And so you're constantly in this conversation. And I knew that that was going to be one of the biggest parts of that journey for me as an author, was getting comfortable with that visibility. And it really has brought so many new opportunities. I wouldn't have known when I was writing this book that I was going to start my own business and like do a whole bunch of like consulting and workshops and events that are all on this topic. But it was the world responding that was like, hey, we want to have this conversation with you. We want to be involved in what you're doing and we want to learn and grow from what you're teaching. And all of those new opportunities are honestly why in February I was like, I have to quit my job because I can't actually say yes to all these opportunities and work full time for somebody else. So I love Mandela, who says, Mandela Dixon, she says, like, bet on yourself. You never lose when you bet on yourself. So I bet on myself. And it's honestly one of the best things that's happened for my growth, for my opportunities. Like, it's just been a beautiful experience. So I want to make sure we have time for breakouts. Do you want to jump in, Danielle? Is there something you want to share or any reflections we should do before breakouts?
Yeah, I'd love to open it up for some questions first.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it'd be great to
Let's
hear.
do questions.
If y'all want to chat, type a question in the chat, and then you can share it out loud. That would be great to hear anything that you have from Kat based on what she shared about her journey to speaking and writing. Getting over that hump of wanting to have your voice heard. I know y'all have questions. And as people, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, how did you choose the topic for your book? And how did you also get over I'm making an assumption, but how did you get over the feeling that you're like, oh, I'm not the expert at this, so why can I write about it? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So the topic for the book kind of chose me because when I moved to the Bay Area in 2014, I lived a lot of places. I lived in Florida, Seattle, Hawaii here. I lived in 2 countries. Like I never had a hard time making friends. I'm introverted, but I'm not shy. So I love people. And obviously I love community, or I wouldn't be starting all these different communities. I've run other ones in Seattle too. And I was like, oh, this will be easy. I'm going to move to the Bay Area where I know literally one person and it'll be okay. And when I got here, it was cool because I felt more at home here than I ever had anywhere else I lived, but I had a really hard time making regular friends. Honestly, I was making friends all the time by going to events and brunches and dinners and meetups and yada yada. And you meet cool people all the time. There's honestly more cool people here than I've ever met anywhere. But what was difficult was making that leap from being acquaintances and transforming that into being regular friends, where you can call them up on a random Saturday and be like, what are you doing? Let's hang out now. I didn't have that. And I had that in other places I lived. And so it felt lonely. And it was my first real experience as an adult of oh, this is what loneliness feels like. Because as I mentioned, I'm an introvert. I love my solitude. I love spending time by myself. But that feeling of wanting a reciprocal availability and enthusiasm and friendship was harder for me to find here. And being a facilitator, I sometimes can't help myself from creating an event and trying to get people together. And so I made the assumption that I was like, I can't be the only person who feels like this. And I also got really, really tired of having small talk. Chelsea, everywhere I went, it was the same fucking questions. Excuse me. It was where do you work? Where are you from? And when they were where are you originally from? Then I would get triggered. So it was so tiring. And I decided to create an event called Better Than Small Talk, where I love questions and I love good conversations. And so I got a whole bunch of question prompts from a previous facilitation activity I used to do and still do called milling, where you get people in small groups with strangers and they answer different questions to really provoke feelings of connection. And so I started doing that event. And I made a website and I was like, if you're tired of having small talk and you want to get to know people in an authentic way, sign up here to find out about it. And I would curate this really diverse mix of people from different industries, because I didn't want it to just be tech people, different ages, different ethnicities, different sexualities. And it was honestly a beautiful experience. And it was through hosting these events from 2015, 16, 17, and exploring and writing through this conversation of what does connection look like in adulthood. Being a UX researcher and designer, I was also doing these qualitative interviews with people who came to the event and finding out what connection looked like in their life and what friendship struggles were like for them. And it was just this body of work that kept building. And after I had 10,000 words, a woman I know was like, wow, it sounds like you're writing a book. And I was like, oh shit, I'm writing a book. Like, I did not know I was writing a book. Because I was just like putting them on my blog, and I did a portrait series and I would post the interviews and the portraits. But it was just like, I was just like doing things because I like to make stuff. And then I was like, oh, I'm writing a book. And so then it got actually a lot more organized and like serious. And I like found an editor, and I was like, I know I want to illustrate it. And I had spent 4 years doing editorial layout for a magazine. So I was like, I can lay it out myself. It's not hard. And so, yeah, it really took shape over the last couple of years, and really 2019 and the second half of 2018, where I was just like, okay, like heads down, like, let's go. And it was like, you know, that like I put on my pep rally and I was like, okay, like, let's go. Cause I would work on it like a couple of nights, you know, from 10 p.m. to midnight. And I would work on it on a Saturday or Sunday for like 5 hours. I was working full time this entire time. So yeah, it came together over in terms of like my relationship to the topic and also the logistics of creating it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else have a question? Or I could talk more about that. I hate the mute button. If I was in a room, okay, as a facilitator, if I was in a room with y'all, it would be like us having like a circle of chairs and like having a group discussion, and everyone has like duct tape over their mouth. Cause I'm like, yo, like talk, join me. I love to hear from you and love to hear what you're thinking, what you're wondering, anything I can share about.
For your book, was it only talks that you did in the Bay Area, or did you concentrate it from all the other places that you've lived as well?
So so it wasn't just my story. So I did research into like, what are the 4 main challenges that adults face when forming connection? And so I did a survey that folks from around the country took. It wasn't just Bay Area. That was important to me, that it not just be Bay Area. And it was folks between the ages of like 21 and 70 who answered it. Metro areas, semi-rural areas, super big urban areas, suburban areas, and really getting like the lay of that land. And what I learned was that there wasn't any one area where people were immune from this struggle, which was unfortunate. And there is something very interesting though around the clustering of personality types in the United States that can make certain regions more difficult or more easy to form friends and community. And the Bay Area happens to be a place where it is uniquely more challenging, yeah, than perhaps like the Midwest or the South in some ways. So there's a really cool book if you want to get into that topic around the clustering of personality types, and also the economic clustering that happens in the United States. There's a book called Who's Your City by Richard Florida. And it really gets into, you know, he's an economist and he worked with a lot of economists on that book. And most of it is about, honestly, industry and his predictions about like what will happen in the United States due to innovation over time. But I appreciate that in that book, he actually does get into the personality experience of living in different cities. And it was very affirming, honestly, in a lot of ways. It made me feel a little less crazy living in the Bay Area, being like, why is this so hard? And then I was reading the book, I was like, wow, this is why it's so hard. Yeah. Let's see. And but there was another part of your question around speaking in different places. So most of the speaking that I do, and particularly this year because of COVID and us being, you know, in lockdown and stuff, all my speaking really has been this year virtual. You know, I've been running in-person events since the early 2000s, and I love doing that. And I had a lot of in-person events planned for this year. Conferences I was going to do like here in the States, in South Africa, like in Seattle, like, and all of that stuff had to move virtual. So that's been kind of a drag, but it's also really awesome because now I'm able to connect with people in different places that otherwise I wouldn't have had an ability to connect. I wouldn't have been able to have a workshop and have someone who is in France join, and she joins every Friday, and it's really awesome. Because I do a connection club now for people who want to nurture their friendships through writing and letters and things like that. And so every week when people come in, it's just like, great. It's like someone's here from Michigan and someone's here from Paris and someone's here from Georgia. And like, I would never be able to do that as a facilitator or speaker if I was, you know, obviously landlocked or landbound. Ooh, someone's here. So Connection Club is the best. Y'all should join my Connection Club. Go to my website. I should put my website in here. WeShouldGetTogether.com. Cool. Let's see what other questions are here in the chat. Let's see.
I know someone asked Nicole. Oh, Christina, do you want to ask
I
a
was gonna
question?
say, yeah, I was like, this isn't so much a question, but an observation, because I was thinking a bit about like how you've started the loneliness pandemic not pandemic, epidemic,
Epidemic.
that you've identified. And I think that's really, really, there's got to be some threads or a thread between that and speaking, because I think you feel more comfortable speaking around groups that you feel like you have more friends in. And I think the damage, I would say, with feeling like more people are strangers or having more disconnection between people around you, is it creates more, like, you feel less comfortable sharing, and so the less comfortable you feel sharing, the more distanced you feel. So I feel like you have been trying to combat that feeling, like, seems like a large part of your life, by trying to participate, by putting yourself out there to like keep people feeling not so much as strangers. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like that these two threads of like speaking and the loneliness epidemic are related some way.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I get a chance to do a speaking gig, whether it's in person or online, it feels better. I see a question here about networking. It feels better than networking. And it feels less lonely. And I have to also say that sometimes running an event is not the best way to make those deep connections, as opposed to being a member of a community that is particularly well run. Because when you're running it, you're with it, but you're kind of a little bit outside, because, you know, when you're doing a live event, particularly in person, you're not just having a conversation with somebody in that moment, but you're also thinking about like the logistics, and you're like, oh shit, somebody spilled something, and you're like, who's taking out the trash? And so there's like all these other logistics you have to think about, and you're worried about what everyone else's experience is, and you're trying to create this thing for them. And that's different from when you get to just be a member and participate at something. So there is a little bit of a loneliness to that just comes with like the logistics of being an event organizer. And that's just that's part of the package. But it is nice to know, particularly in an affinity group like Bay Area Black Designers or Women Talk Design, it's like to be with other people who share some part of your identity, can identify with some part of your journey, and can relate to some of what you're saying or feeling. And that helps it feel less lonely, because you can at least look and be like, wow, like I care about this thing, and everyone else who's in this room cares about this thing too. Yeah.
Everyone just needed to get warmed up. The questions are rolling in. So Nicole, I think, had the first one in here. She had asked, how do you find something to talk about? So I know that you shared how you got to your path of talking about friendships and writing about them, but do you have any advice for anyone on who's looking for what they should speak about?
Yeah, I would say, you know, what do you care about? Like, what lights you up? What's something that you think about whenever you have time to think? What's something that you love learning about? What's something that you are fascinated by when you learn something new about it? You know, those topics that provoke a sense of wonder or fascination or perpetual curiosity in you are a good topic for you to talk about or to write about, because if you choose to write about them or speak about them, you will be constantly re-educating yourself about it, re-immersing yourself in the research, re-immersing yourself in those conversations. And so you want to pick something you're not going to get tired of. You want to pick something that like you will continue to be curious about and interested in, and not get tired of discussing. So I would say pick things like that.
That's great advice. There's also a question here from Andre. Andre, do you want to ask this, or do you want me to read it out loud? Are you able to unmute?
Feel free to read it out loud.
Oh no, you're unmuting. Go for it. I'm only going to read it out loud if someone can't unmute. I realize there's homeschooling happening and all different things going on.
No worries. My question is, I'm a design leader. I have a group of designers I manage, and some of them are quite shy. So my question is, what are some strategies you'd recommend to help someone find the courage to raise their voice and to be more public?
So scaffolding is pretty key. When I was doing youth work, as well as like running these nonprofits that were about like different empowerment programs, scaffolding is a key part of like building any kind of skill, whether it's, you know, you're leveling up your comfort speaking, or whether it's, you know, even trying to like lift weights. Like you don't start with like the 50-pound weight, at least not me. Start with like the 10 pounds. So, so yeah, like starting small, and there's, when you get comfortable with that, then you take another level up, and then you take another level up and another level up. So if they're really shy, and you know, they don't want to speak in front of the company or department, maybe give them some responsibilities to like lead a section of the next team meeting. And then once they do that, then maybe they like facilitate the whole team meeting, and organize other people to lead sections. And then once they've done that, then maybe they lead something for their like feature team. So it's scaffolding up the level of risk so that when it is time to maybe do a company speaking event or an external facing event, it doesn't feel as scary because you didn't have to jump from like 0 to 100. You got to go like 10 steps at a time. So that would be my advice, is to give them little bites at a time. And once they feel comfortable with that, to level it up. And I talk about this in the book, not specifically on the topic of speaking, but around the topic of awkwardness, because one of the primary challenges that came up in a lot of my user interviews was people felt awkward trying to make better friends. And they're like, I don't know what to do. It's just awkward, so I want to run away. And it's like, I interviewed a therapist who talked about how you use a kind of like hierarchy risk exposure. I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's basically a hierarchy of challenges that help you feel less afraid with whatever the thing is that you're afraid of, whether it's spiders or speaking in public. You know, you get, or being afraid of dogs. Like I'm afraid of dogs, but like I can like expose myself to like, well, my friend has a puppy who's like really mellow, and like maybe I hang out with them first. And then like the next time I'm around a dog who's like a little bit more jumpy, like maybe I take it so, you know. And so like with different levels of exposure to the thing you're afraid of, whether it's public speaking or dogs, you can get more comfortable with it. So, or awkwardness.
Awesome. We have a few more minutes for questions before breakout. So the next one we have is from Arushi. Are you there? Are you able to unmute?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Kat. I think my question was mainly around, like, I share a lot of the sentiments you shared about networking. I don't even, I've created a feeling towards that word at this point where I don't like it as much as I used to because of the tag that goes along with it. So I was just curious about like what advice you have on how to create conversations because I do have to go to events to meet people as a way to meet people, and I just was curious about what I could be doing more to create opportunities for conversations that are more than just the networking like chat.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, you know, if the word like networking just kind of makes you go like, oh, yuck, like it kind of does for a lot of people, including myself. Don't think about it so much as networking, and thinking about it more as an opportunity to like build a relationship. Mm-hmm. And even though in a lot of events like that, there's like dozens or even hundreds of people there, try not to focus on being like, oh gosh, like, who do I talk to? How do I know if I find the right person? Just focus on making one or two connections that feel meaningful. Not every single conversation has to lead to the best conversation of your life, or like the best friend of your life. Yeah. It's okay if it's minimal. But if you do find someone you connect with and all you have is one really great 15-minute conversation with them, it's okay to say like, wow, that was enough for me. I feel satisfied. Like I'm okay. I don't have to like stress myself out trying to meet everybody else. And taking that level of pressure down really helps me to know like I'm here to build a relationship with a couple of people, and to focus on maybe going a little bit deeper with one or two people, as opposed to feeling like I'm just going to do like a tiny touch on every single person. Yeah. So that's one thing. And the other thing that honestly really, really helps, particularly for avoiding, I really want to avoid those like small talk questions of like, where are you from? Like, what do you do? So leading with curiosity first, and being the person to ask a question first, often like kind of like Aikido's that small talk out of the way. It's just like, I'm just going to push that over here and like offer you something else. And when you ask somebody a more interesting question than those like typical boring ones, honestly, people are often not only pleasantly surprised, but they describe it as like refreshing and like a relief to talk about something else. So leading with a question that is more interesting really helps. And it doesn't have to be, you know, the most like deep, so tell me your deep, dark secrets.
Yeah.
It's just like, so tell me something that brought you joy this week, or tell me something that's really present for you right now. Or what's something nice you did for yourself this week, or that you want to do for yourself over the next week. Or tell me about a trip you went on once that you really liked. And it's like, you can see like sometimes people are like, oh, I wasn't expecting a question like that. But then they're like glad, they're really, really glad. And when I was running Better Than Small Talk, that was also one of the biggest takeaways from that, which if you want to get all the question cards, they are at Better Than Small Talk, or you can, they're in the back of my book. All like 350 plus questions are in the back here if you need conversation starters. And if you show that curiosity, show that interest in learning about another person, and give them a chance to step forward into something that's a little more unique, that often like dissipates a lot of the anxiety or awkwardness.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, as you know, Kat has been talking about the power of no small talk and meaningful conversations. I do want to make sure that we have time for breakouts. So I know that we still have a couple of questions that are in here. And so Kat, if it's okay with you, maybe you can stay here, and the folks who didn't get their questions answered, Catherine and Sabrina, if you want to stay and ask those questions one-on-one. And I know some of you, might be in a place that you can't unmute and chat right now, and that's okay. But if you can, we invite you to join a breakout room. And this is an opportunity to meet other people who are here. Kat has some no small talk questions that she's going to share with us that you can use as a starting point for a conversation. And we hope that you'll be able to meet someone new, have a great conversation, and then we'll bring everyone back with about 2 minutes left.
So I dropped the questions in the chat. You maybe don't have time to do all of them, so go with one that resonates with you, that you feel comfortable answering. And they're really all about the concept of visibility and topics that you feel comfortable talking about, and also finding ways to affirm your voice, even if you don't feel ready to speak publicly about it. Are there ways that you can still affirm that you have a right to say something? For me, it was during those, couple years where I was writing a lot of essays about friendship, and I was like, what am I doing? Am I going to put these on Medium? But even though I wasn't sharing them publicly yet, it was still a way to affirm my point of view, the things that mattered to me and the things I was thinking about, by just writing about them. Cool. So
Great.
I hope you enjoy the small groups.
Yeah, so if you haven't used breakout rooms before, you would have had a notice that says join this breakout room. Just press OK. It'll send you into a new room, and you will be able to meet someone there. And then it'll call you back when you have time to come back, or you can just come back on your own. So the rooms are open, and enjoy, and we will see you soon.